Dan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. How's your morning been?
Been good. Had a coffee already.
Yeah?
I met with one of our new junior folks that's going to start in January. So it's been a good morning so far.
That's awesome. Well, I read the forecasting report you and your team put together earlier this week, and I just want to say it was an awesome report, and I really enjoyed learning about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had some questions I want to run by you, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, please.
Cool. So I want to start out by reflecting on last year, 2024. As the year wraps up here, I wanted to know a little bit more about you and what was interesting in the Atlanta industrial real estate market that you noticed.
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest surprise to me was that last year performed better than we had expected.
Okay.
So I don't know if you remember this, but by the end of 23, there was some concern around the health and the state of the economy. And the forecasts were not so rosy. And so at the end of 23, we were forecasting growth to be pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that 24, while it wasn't a fantastic year, I think we're going to wind up, our quarterly stats aren't over yet for Q4, but I think we're going to wind up absorbing 10 to 12 million feet industrial, which is a good solid year.
Yeah.
But we were forecasting a number well below that. So 24, while it wasn't an outstanding year, definitely outperformed what we thought it would. And so that's been positive. Development activity, I would also say, has been a little more muted than we thought, which is also good because vacancy is a little bit higher.
Yeah.
I think we're at 8.2, right around that number. So Q4 will probably wind up being still somewhere around that number. So the fact that development activity is muted is good. It'll let the market recover a little bit. We'll give it a little more time to recover.
Gotcha. So what led 2024 to be a better year than just forecasted? Any nuances that you noticed that, like, hey, I think that really made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, the economy held up better than we thought it would.
Okay.
And I think that really was the key. There were some calls for GDP growth to be very low to negative.
Mm-hmm.
And GDP growth in 23 wasn't all that great. So the fact that we plodded along and we didn't see any big aberrations of the economy in 24 really led to pretty good growth overall.
Yeah, I follow. That makes a lot of sense. So I guess I was looking at the year in reverse. Now going forward, you mentioned some forecasting here and what you and your team expect to happen, but what do you see that's most exciting or interesting to you that really catches your eye?
Yeah, so, not to get too political, but I think the fact that the election is in the rearview mirror and that there's a little more certainty around what the new policies of the incoming administration might bring is a positive, just in terms of the overall stability. The policies themselves are yet to be determined, but there is some talk about upcoming tariffs, deregulation, and I think the business community is looking upon that as a positive. So I think the banking industry is a little bit more bullish going into 2025. The fact that the Fed potentially could make another move lowering interest rates is another positive that we could see happen in 25. I still think that's debatable. We'll see if it happens. So there's some good positive indicators. And if you look at the GDP forecasts from some of the major banks and institutions, and we took, I think, maybe a look at 6 or 7 of those and averaged them, right? Mm-hmm. Some of those numbers were pretty high, some were a little bit lower, but the average is 2.3%. And 2.3% GDP growth is pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself tells us that banks, institutions are feeling pretty good about 25.
Yeah.
And when they feel pretty good about 25, it usually means that commercial real estate perform commensurate with what their predictions are. We typically, the performance of commercial real estate, office, industrial, retail generally follows macro trends, like GDP growth, job growth, things like that. So we're feeling pretty good about next year.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I'm not gonna lie, I love that. So you mentioned the election that we just had. And in this, you talk about how S&P 500 companies are citing a less opportunity for us to go into a recession. And as a result of that, the election just happened. So I was curious to see how you see the election affecting the Atlanta industrial real estate market and the market as a whole.
I mean, I don't think politics plays a huge role in the performance of commercial real estate, but certainty does. And so again, not to dwell on politics, but the fact that the election's done and winner's been decided and there hasn't been any issues on who won, who didn't, should win. And the fact that's not being litigated in some way is positive.
Yeah.
Just overall. In terms of any prospect of a coming recession, it's interesting. We included in the report a graph about how many times, and this is a data point that can be found on the internet fairly readily.
Yeah.
And I think it was provided by FactSet, if I'm remembering this correctly. One of the data points they track is on earnings calls that can be, anybody can join in on an earnings call. How many times are C-level folks mentioning the word recession on those calls?
Yeah.
And if you look at the chart, they don't seem to be very worried about it at this stage. Whereas in 23, you see where there was a lot of mention of recession.
Yeah.
So, that indicator in itself tells us that it's less of a concern and that they're more focused on growth than they are on any recession next year.
Yeah.
Just positive sign.
Interesting. So shifting back to the real estate side of things, development is down right now. As you can see in this report, cost of putting these buildings together just is high. From the acquisition side or buying buildings, the cost of capital is high as well. Going into 2025, do you think there's going to be more opportunities for investors to purchase buildings, for funds, for themselves, or do you think the opportunity is really to pick up more ground-up development opportunities throughout the market?
I think there's opportunities in both areas.
Okay.
As you mentioned, the development cycle is at a low point. So I believe we are under 10 million square feet under construction at this point in the cycle, which is pretty low for Atlanta.
Yeah.
We do think there will be more groundbreakings this year because we're at a low point. So we know that there are developers out there looking for sites to build on in the future. There's a fair amount of that activity going on now because we are at a low point. So
yeah.
I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think we will see in the second half of 25, we will see that the development cycle will ramp back up. We do think that vacancy will remain in that sort of 7.8 to 8.2 range because there's just not a lot that's going to deliver in the first half of the year. So I think there's opportunity there potentially to build and take advantage of a low point in the cycle.
Gotcha.
In terms of availability of product to purchase, that's been a challenge. It was a challenge in 24, where there's plenty of capital on the sidelines that like to get placed into commercial real estate. Just wasn't a lot available to buy.
Yeah.
With interest rates potentially being lower in 25 and the cost of capital, being lower, I think there's a potential for that logjam to break in 25, especially if we see, increases in GDP, increases in the amount of available debt for leverage. Can we get enough activity and enough folks to want to sell their product? Do we see a logjam break there on the investment side? I think that remains to be seen. But I think the signs point to a more active 25, and hopefully we'll see some sellers that actually want to sell their product. And I think one of the major challenges that we do see is, for folks that own product, if they sell the product, what will they purchase to replace what they sold?
Yeah.
Right. And so you have this element where you have sellers unwilling to sell, partially because there's just not enough out there to buy.
Yeah.
Right. So that for that logjam to break, we'll have to see some changes in terms of the ability of sellers to sell, because I think the buyers are out there.
I would definitely agree with that sentiment. I think everybody wants to get money in the game now, in the market. But like you mentioned, I don't think everybody's a great place to put that money once they exit a building. So I think it's very interesting to see how that unfolds in 2025. I guess from a leasing side of things, leverage is a big thing that tenant rep and landlord brokers work with, trying to understand, what lever to pull to make a deal happen. And kind of want to get your take as well on this. Who has more leverage heading into 2025? Is it the tenants moving into the market, or is it the landlords that are, the ones controlling these buildings?
Well, it's definitely more balanced than it's been in a long time. So a couple of years ago, I would have said that the leverage was clearly on the side of a landlord.
Yeah.
And I think you saw rents rise as a result of that, a lack of available space. was causing some real tightening, uncomfortable tightening in the market, where tenants were really having to pony up to find the space that they wanted. We saw some rise in sublease space happen last year. We saw a rise in overall available space that opened things up a little bit for tenants. But as we said last year in our forecast, we said that there would be a window of opportunity for tenants to take advantage of that opportunity where space availability was slackening a bit. More space is available out there to take. And I think we're still in that environment where availability is much better. I think we're 8.2 vacancy, so availability is somewhere north of there, which is good. You know, if you're at 10 to 12%, that's a healthy market where there is still pretty good options for tenants. However, as 2025 begins, and if we do see an increase in absorption, that window, I think, will begin to close. So we could see a scenario where, you know, vacancy begins to decline, availability begins to decline in, say, end of Q1 into Q2, Q3 of next year. Again, remains to be seen whether we actually do see that increase in demand, but we're forecasting it. And I do think availability will become a little bit tighter, you know, call it mid-year next year.
Gotcha. So the bottom line there, if you're a tenant in the market, figure it out now rather than waiting a few months or a few quarters.
I wouldn't wait. And the product that does come online, the stuff that's under construction now, that will help availability in the future, is more expensive, right? Because it costs more to build that product now. So in order to realize a return on that build and that risk for the developer, they're going to have to charge more for the space in the future.
So I've noticed escalations. They've gone from 3% to now 4%, and here and there you'll see a 5% escalation on these leases. Do you have any insight on why that growth has been happening and lease escalations?
It's just a function of the market. It's just a function of supply and demand. There's just less available, and landlords were in the driver's seat in terms of escalations. There's just not much available, so it's, you know, the rent is higher. And they can increase the rate at a higher rate year over year. And they've done that. I think they'll remain relatively flat in 25. I don't see any major push to go to 5% broadly, but I think 4% is probably here to stay for a while.
Wow, that's huge. To finish the conversation off, I want to talk about technology, data centers, AI, automation. All of that revolves around the warehouse, the market as a whole. I just kind of wanted to get your take on what next year is going to look like, what kind of nuances we might see in the market as a result of technology, the growth of AI, automation in the warehouse and data centers.
We actually did a presentation on this about 6 or 7 months ago to the IAMC group here in Atlanta, and I'll try to recall some of those figures. But if I do recall correctly, I think Amazon has over 500,000 robots in their warehouses. The investment in robotics and automation and AI is increasing logarithmically year after year. So it's a trend that's here to stay. One of the challenges that a lot of folks running warehouses and manufacturing facilities have is labor. You know, finding labor, qualified labor, skilled labor in a lot of cases to help run those facilities.
And keeping them,
right? There's a lot of competition out there. So yes, finding labor is tough. So one of the answers to that problem is automation, robotics, and AI. So the use of those in warehouses will definitely increase efficiency. It will sort of stem the tide on or help with the problem of labor and acquiring labor and keeping labor. So it's a trend that's here to stay. Now, I would say firsthand, just in speaking with our producers, we're not seeing it at a larger scale as perhaps what's covered in the media. But granted, you know, a lot of our clients are not, the Amazons of the world. They're regional, super regional folks as well, and they're kicking the tires on it. So I do think it'll probably start with the FedExes and the UPSs and the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world, and trickle down eventually.
Yeah.
Hasn't gotten to sort of that mid to large size user yet, but it will. It's only a matter of time.
Gotcha. Well, that's exciting and interesting to see how that unfolds. Well, Dan, I appreciate your time today. Enjoyed learning more about this forecast and your personal insights into the road ahead.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, sir.